All of a sudden I see a fleeing leg flying. A leg. Not attached to a human. It's honestly the sickest thing I've ever seen. Welcome to Daily Dose Reddit. When driving at night, what is the scariest or most unexplainable thing you've ever seen? Scariest only because it nearly killed me. Driving back from a late high school football game that I was covering, I was going through a very remote section of highway and farmland. I was a little zoned out, but the road was straight and wide for a while. I was going along at a good clip when I was vaguely aware that there was suddenly something in my way, but it was almost just a sense of it, not anything I could really see. Something just didn't look right, and I could tell hitting the brakes was not going to help, so I swerved into the opposing lane and passed something large that had been blocking my lane. I still didn't know what it was, but it was large. I got turned around and went back slowly to see what the hell I had barely missed. When I got close enough to see better in my headlights, there they were, two very large, completely black cows. They were big enough that my hatchback would have been totally crushed if I'd hit them, and it could have easily been a fatal accident, for me and the cows. I called the local police and they sent a car out while I waited to make sure no one else hit them, even though the cows wandered off the road a ways and I hadn't seen another car for quite a while. When they got there, they knew who the cows belonged to and called the guy up all pissed off because this apparently happened more frequently than they liked. About 20 years ago, I was driving home from a late wedding DJ gig. I was driving south on a major interstate which was relatively empty at 2:30 a.m. or so. At one point, in the narrows, the retaining walls on each side get very high as the highway snakes underneath overpasses. Out of nowhere, a young woman jumped down from the retaining wall onto the highway and directly in front of my car. I hit the brakes hard, came to a complete stop, and nearly slammed into her. She looked up, ran to my passenger door and got in looking terrified. She looked between 16 and 20 years old, long blonde hair, and her clothes looked a little dirty. Not homeless dirty, but like she'd fallen down a few times. "I just need to call my mom," she said. I tried to calm her down and began moving back down the highway, and behind me about 50 feet, I see another figure jump down onto the highway out of my rear view window. I didn't mention this to her and she didn't look back or see the other person. I sped up and went about 4 or 5 exits south. She kept saying over and over, "I just need to call my mom." This was before most people had cell phones, so I told her I would take her to one of the 24-hour grocery stores and she could call her mom. I asked her if she needed money for a pay phone, what was wrong, etc. She said nothing other than, "I just need to call my mom." I pulled up to the grocery store and stopped. She got out quickly, but not running, then ducked into the grocery. She didn't say a word to me or look back. I pulled into the gas station across the street and called 911 and told them the entire story and let them know the young woman was inside the grocery store and a description of her. I have no idea what happened. I don't know why she did that, what happened to her, who the figure behind us on the highway was, nothing. Really made me super uneasy. I think I did the right thing. I would have tried to do more, but she seemed really fragile emotionally and somewhat afraid of me. I am a guy, so I wanted her to just be able to get to where she needed to be. Was driving with some friends at around 2 a.m., rainy cold night, along a winding section of road with a steep drop-off to the river below on one side. We pass a small pull-off and notice a car with no lights on. As we drive by we catch a glimpse of a person standing next to it, and as the headlights hit him we see his shirt is covered in blood all down the front. We don't stop, but turn around and drive back slowly. I roll down my window as we approach, and he just stands there, blood all over his shirt and pants. His car looks fine, couldn't have been a crash. Out the window I ask if he's okay, and over the pounding rain and roar of the river below I hear the most distant and sorrow, "I'm fine." Gave me chills. I don't reply and slowly drive off as my buddy calls the cops. About half an hour later we drive by again and there is an ambulance and a couple cruisers. Turns out the guy slit his wrists and was going to jump off into the river, cold, rainy and pitch black. Scary where your mind can take you. There's a public park near my house, which gets pretty dark at night. I was driving home tired and exhausted after midnight when I realized that someone had dragged all the garbage cans and other large items out into the middle of the road to form a barricade of sorts. I'm not sure if it was just a lame prank or if someone was waiting for a car to stop so that they could rob the person. I didn't bother to find out. There was just enough room for my small car to slip through. It's happened twice in the past few weeks, so I'm going to assume it's just some teenagers being jerks. This story is one where I was the one that, unintentionally, scared somebody. I was driving home from a friend's late one evening, probably around 3 a.m. The town I live in and grew up in has a reputation for being a racist area thanks to a few high-profile incidents and a reasonable amount of racist idiots having lived here in the past. As I approached the town, I was going round a roundabout when a car joins, ignoring my right-of-way and cuts me off a bit. It was a shit bit of driving, but I'm reasonably good at not letting that get to me. What was mildly irritating though was given how keen the driver was to get out onto the roundabout in front of me, he then drove about 5 miles per hour below the speed limit on the way into the town, and like I said, it's late and I just want to get to bed. About a mile later we reach the main street of the town, which has many turnoffs, and I'm still sat behind them. They pick one of the quieter turnoffs, which is the one I usually use to get home. At the end of that street they can go left or right and still end up at the other end of the housing estate. They choose right, which is where I need to go. Then they have a few turnoffs in both directions before hitting another main road. They choose the quietest turnoff, I presume thinking I'm following them and wanting to see if I actually am or if I'm just making my way into the main road. Unfortunately for them, they've turned onto my road. They're crawling along it at this point, obviously slightly worried. The driver probably thinks I'm still pissed about being cut off and I'm following him for some sort of revenge. So they decide to pull in and let me pass. They indicate and pull across a driveway which just happened to be mine. I had to pull alongside them and open my passenger side window. The driver opens his and there's 2 to 3 black teenagers in the car, all looking slightly terrified by the pretty big skinhead, not by choice, white guy who has been following them and now pulled up alongside them in the middle of a quiet estate in an area known for being racist. The look of relief on his face when I said, "Sorry mate, that's my driveway you're blocking there," was pretty hilarious. Poor kid was scared shitless, but somehow in trying to get rid of me made a series of road choices that convinced him he was about to be murdered. One night at around midnight a year ago, a man pulled into my driveway in an SUV. My driveway is quite large and loops around, and he parked with his headlights set to bright and pointed toward my front door. My front door was open with just a locked screen door between us. Since it was close to midnight and he parked so strangely, I grabbed one of my handguns before heading to the door to double-check that it was locked. I considered closing the actual door, but if they were there to rob me, they already knew I was home. Plus, they could just be in need of assistance. I set my handgun next to the front door close enough that I could grab it in under a second and out of view from the outside. A man stepped out of the SUV, which caused the interior lights of the car to turn on, and through the brights I could just barely see that he wasn't alone. The man approached my front door and greeted me. I asked why he was in front of my home, and he said he was looking for a friend's house. I advised that he wasn't at the right place, and that he should continue on down the road to find the residential area he was probably looking for. He said he came from that direction, and reiterated that he was looking for a friend's house. He had a smartphone in his hand, so I suggested that he use it to call his friend for directions. He gave me an excuse about how his friend wouldn't pick up. So I suggested he type his friend's address into Google Maps and follow the directions to get there. He said he tried that, but he couldn't get it to work. He asked me to come outside of my house, at midnight, to help him type an address into Google Maps. I obviously refused. I said, "Look, bud, it's almost midnight, I don't know you, and you're insistent that I unlock my door and come outside to help you with something a toddler could do." He responded, "Hey, man. Don't call the police. I'm a military vet, and I just need some help. So can you please come outside and help me?" Now, I feel I should state here that up to this point, the police had not been mentioned at all. So obviously, telling me not to call the police made me want to call the police. I put one hand on my gun before informing him that I would be calling the police, and that he should leave before that happens. He started to protest, but I pulled out the gun and used the side of the barrel to close my actual door. I just wanted to show him that I was armed, but I didn't want to escalate things further by pointing a gun at him. He fled while I called the cops, but nothing ever came of it. Then 6 months ago, my neighbor ran into a similar situation, SUV, multiple men, only he was asleep when they showed up. A man rang his doorbell close to midnight. He got up, and opened his front door without really looking to see who was there. As soon as he did, a man that had been standing to the side of the door out of sight, pointed a shotgun to his head and walked him back into his own house. He sat there for hours with a shotgun pointed at his head while multiple men robbed him. They didn't shoot him, but they did clean him out. He lost everything: jewelry, cash, credit cards, guns, TVs, computers, you name it. They even made him give his PIN number, and drove to go test it while he was still being held at gunpoint. I don't know for sure that they were the same people, but if you wanted to get someone into position to pull that same maneuver at my house, knowing that the homeowner was watching, blinding them with the bright lights of an SUV would be a damn good way to do it. While working one night, was called to attend a head-on car accident with 3 people killed. The driver of one vehicle wasn't wearing a seatbelt and the force of the impact had embedded his steering wheel in his forehead. His best mate was in the seat next to him and was conscious and making the most horrific shrieks. We'll never forget that image or that sound. I was driving to work at 3 in the morning. I work at an airport, and I was in the middle lane doing 70 miles per hour when a lady ran at my car, in the middle of a highway, waving her arms. I swerved into the left lane so fast I couldn't believe I didn't hit her later, and kept going. I would have stopped, I really would have, but something in her face didn't say, "I need help." It was more, "I'm on massive amounts of drugs." When I got to my lot 10 minutes later, I called 911 and told them what happened. I never heard anything or saw anything in the papers, so I assume she wandered away. A couple of friends and I were coming home from a late afternoon night hike a few weeks ago, and we decided to pull over near a rundown rest stop so my friend could use the bathroom and the rest of us could stretch our legs. It was maybe 8 p.m. and it's winter here, so it was pitch black. This area is just thick trees and bushland, so there's no houses or campgrounds or whatever around. I believe there used to be, but they moved the campground somewhere else because it's on the side of a mountain and it was too dangerous. As we were all getting back into the car, I felt sort of uneasy. I didn't want to mention it because I didn't want my friends to make a big joke about it, but someone else spoke up and said they felt uncomfortable too, and that we should get out of there. We all agreed, and as soon as my friend started the car, these lights flickered on in the middle of the trees. We kinda stared at them for a moment. I wanna say there was 6 or 7 of them. 2 of them were higher than the others, and then the rest were in a line below them. They kinda bobbed, like somebody was holding a torch or something, but they were way brighter than a torch. We started reversing out of the car park, the car still facing these lights, when suddenly they just sped at us through the trees. I don't know how to explain it, it looked like they were zooming towards us super fast. We were terrified and my friend just flung us out and got the hell out of there. I'd have just told myself it was people in the woods, except when we were driving down the road at 60 per hour, we could still see them trailing behind us in the trees, keeping pace. After a couple of seconds, they just disappeared and the rest of the way home was uneventful as ever. We have absolutely no idea what that could have been. As far as I know, you can't get vehicles into the area since it's overgrown and dangerous, and I don't know that any person can keep up with a car like that. I'm not a big believer in aliens and UFOs and stuff, but to be honest, if you told me that's what we saw, I wouldn't be surprised. I was driving in Maine and there was a moose just hanging out on the highway. I just remember screaming and driving in the breakdown lane. I never realized how big a moose was. I also don't know why it was calmly standing there. I had something creepy happen to me a few months ago. I was driving home after seeing a play with a friend of mine, so it was probably around 11:30 p.m. to 12 a.m. Also, I live in rural America, so there weren't any street lamps or houses for the majority of the drive. I was driving over this bridge and saw a car sitting on the side of the road turned on. I wasn't really concerned about it because it's a common spot for cars to pull off, even if it was kind of late. As I passed the car, I looked in my rearview mirror and saw that they had pulled out behind me. Again, I didn't really think anything of it, until they began to tailgate me hard. While that behavior isn't unheard of, it tends to be rare since the road is curvy and a hotspot for deer. I kept driving for a bit with this car right up on me, which caused me to feel frustrated, confused, and strangely paranoid. Then, the car's headlights went out abruptly while I was nearing the end of a stretch of road surrounded completely by forest. This made me freak the fuck out because it was still super close behind me. Then, the car sped up and went around me, but almost immediately slowed down to a standstill in front of me. At this point I was so afraid, so I sped up, went around the car, and drove way too fast to get home and then sprinted inside and locked the door. I didn't notice the car around my house, but I still feel worrisome about the entire ordeal and wish I knew why someone would drive like that. Thank you so much for watching.